Alpha King was found collapsing in the snow by Omega, and his awakening question shattered destiny. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. In the snowy wilderness, a scene unfolded that would change the course of destiny forever. A powerful, yet fallen figure lay collapsed in the cold, snow-covered ground. The Alpha King, once revered across the lands, was now at the mercy of the elements. His strength had betrayed him, and the cold was relentless. He had once commanded armies, held power over the kingdom, and yet now he was nothing more than a vulnerable man in the middle of a brutal storm. The once proud leader, Luca King, had been caught off guard, his body battered and broken. The world that had once bent to his will was now an indifferent force against him. As Luca struggled to hold on, his eyes fluttered shut, surrendering to the numbness creeping up his limbs. He had no way of knowing that fate had something else in store for him. As the winds howled and the snow continued to fall, a figure approached. Unlike the Alpha King, this person was not bound by the same laws of nature, nor the same expectations of power. Aaliyah Gray, an Omega, had always been seen as weaker by society's standards. But what others failed to recognize was the power that simmered beneath Aaliyah's calm exterior. Aaliyah had no intention of saving Luca when they first crossed paths. In fact, he had been on his own journey, unaware of the fate that was about to entwine their paths. But when Aaliyah saw the fallen figure of the Alpha King in the snow, something stirred within him. The instinct to help, to save, was overwhelming. He rushed to Luca's side, unsure of what to do, but desperate to offer assistance. It was the first act of many that would begin to unravel the threads of destiny. As Aaliyah bent over Luca's unconscious form, something sparked in the air. A strange connection formed between them, something neither of them could understand at that moment. The winds howled louder, and the snow began to swirl around them. But within that storm, there was a moment of clarity. Luca stirred, his body awakening to a new reality. The Alpha King's eyes opened, but they were not the same eyes that had once seen only dominance and power. His gaze met Aaliyah's, and in that moment, Luca realized that something had shifted inside him. This Omega, this seemingly weak individual, had unknowingly awakened something deep within him. The question that lingered in Luca's mind was simple, yet profound. What had just happened? What had changed within him? His awakening wasn't just physical. It was a mental and spiritual shift, one that would forever alter the trajectory of his life. Little did he know, the journey ahead would be filled with more challenges, more revelations, and more truths about his own existence than he had ever imagined. As the snow continued to fall, Luca slowly began to regain consciousness. His head ached, his limbs were numb, but his mind was alert, clearer than it had been in what felt like forever. For a moment, he lay still, unsure of where he was or what had happened. The bitter cold still clung to his skin, but there was something different now, something lingering in the air that hadn't been there before. His eyes opened fully, and he saw the face of the person who had saved him. Aaliyah Gray, an Omega, was kneeling beside him, looking at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. The moment their eyes met, Luca felt a strange sensation deep within him, a feeling he couldn't explain. It wasn't just gratitude for being saved, nor was it simply the lingering effects of his near-death experience. No, there was something else, something more profound. Aaliyah had saved him, yes, but in that act, something inside Luca had awakened. His mind swirled with questions, but the most pressing one was simple. Why? Why had he been saved by someone who was supposed to be weaker than him? Why had Aaliyah risked everything for him? These questions lingered in the air between them as the cold wind continued to howl. Aaliyah didn't say anything at first, simply watching Luca, waiting for him to speak. It was strange, Luca thought. He had been a king, a ruler of powerful armies. And yet, here he was, vulnerable and confused, unable to even comprehend the nature of the strange connection he felt with this Omega. His gaze flickered to the snow-covered landscape around them. It was as if the world itself had been frozen in time. But Aaliyah's presence was different. There was a warmth, a quiet strength about him that Luca couldn't quite place. He wanted to ask Aaliyah everything, but his throat felt dry and his voice was weak. Instead, he took a deep breath, steadying himself as best as he could. "Why?" he asked hoarsely, his voice barely a whisper. Aaliyah didn't immediately respond, but his eyes softened, the tension in the air easing slightly. "I could ask you the same question," Aaliyah finally said. His voice was calm, measured, but there was something there, a hidden depth, a quiet wisdom that Luca hadn't expected. "Why did you fall? Why were you out here, in the snow, so far from your people?" Luca's brow furrowed. He had no answers for Aaliyah's question. His pride had been shattered, his strength had failed him. And yet here he was, facing the very person he would have once dismissed as nothing more than an Omega. The realization hit him harder than anything he had ever experienced in his life. He had no control over this situation. He had no answers. It was humbling. Aaliyah stood up, dusting the snow off his clothing, and then extended a hand to Luca, as if offering him a way out of the cold, out of the storm. For a moment, Luca hesitated. He had been an alpha all his life, a ruler, a leader. To accept help from someone like Aaliyah, an Omega, felt unnatural, foreign. And yet, there was a warmth in the Omega's eyes, a kind of silent understanding that made Luca question everything he had ever believed. Slowly, Luca reached up, taking Aaliyah's hand. The moment their hands touched, something inside Luca shifted once again. It was as if a barrier, something deep within him, had broken open. The questions that had been plaguing him intensified, but so did the feeling of something new awakening inside him. Something powerful, something beyond the limits of what he had known. As they stood together in the snow, Luca realized that this moment, this strange encounter with Aaliyah, would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life. A chapter that would challenge everything he had ever known about power, about fate, and about himself. The snow began to settle, and for the first time since his collapse, Luca felt a strange calmness wash over him. He had always believed that power was the key to control, that strength was the ultimate answer to every problem. But standing here, in the cold, with Aaliyah's hand still holding his, he couldn't help but question everything he had once known. The Omega had saved him, yes, but felt like something more had happened, something beyond simple physical aid. Aaliyah didn't speak for a while, allowing the silence between them to linger. There was no rush, no need for words. The snow, now softening to a gentle fall, seemed to offer a moment of peace, a brief pause in the storm that had been raging both outside and inside Luca. The world around them had changed, but it was as if time had frozen in that moment. Slowly, Aaliyah helped Luca to his feet. His body still felt weak, and every movement was slow, but there was a strength in Aaliyah's presence that seemed to steady him. Luca glanced at Aaliyah, noticing for the first time how calm and composed the Omega was. Where Luca had once been the epitome of strength and control, Aaliyah radiated a quiet, almost unshakable calmness. It was in the way he moved, the way he spoke without urgency or fear. "You're different," Luca finally said, his voice still rough but more steady than before. "I've never met anyone like you." Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued to walk beside Luca, guiding him through the snow-covered terrain. "I'm not like most Omegas," Aaliyah said softly, almost as if to himself. "I've always known there was more to me than what others saw. But it wasn't until now that I realized what that really means." Luca furrowed his brow. He had always seen Omegas as lesser beings, the weakest of the pack, subservient and fragile. But now, standing next to Aaliyah, he realized how little he truly understood. The reality of the world he had ruled seemed so small, so limited. What does it mean? Luca asked, his curiosity piqued. Aaliyah paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon, as if searching for the right words. It means I don't have to fit into the mold that everyone else expects, Aaliyah said. And it means I'm not bound by the same rules that others are. Luca felt a weight settle on his chest as the words sank in. It was a revelation, one that challenged everything he had ever believed. Aaliyah's words weren't just a statement about himself. They were a challenge to Luca's own existence, to the way he had lived his life, and to the way he had viewed the world. For the first time, Luca realized that strength didn't come from dominance alone. It came from understanding, from knowing who you were, even in the face of adversity. And as he walked beside Aaliyah, Luca felt something inside him begin to shift. It wasn't just his body that had been awakened. It was his mind, his spirit, his very essence. There was more to him than he had ever realized, and there was more to Aaliyah than anyone could have ever imagined. The path ahead would not be easy, Luca knew that. But with Aaliyah by his side, something told him that the journey they were about to embark on would change everything. They were no longer two beings separated by power and status. They were two souls bound together by something greater, something that neither of them could fully understand just yet. But they would in time. And as they continued to walk through the snow, Luca couldn't help but wonder just how much more there was to discover about himself, and about the Omega who had, in one way or another, already begun to shatter his destiny. Aaliyah and Luca walked side by side through the snow, the wind still howling around them, but felt less harsh now. The world had quieted, as if it, too, was waiting for something. As they moved forward, Luca could feel the strange shift in the air, a pull between them that he couldn't explain. It was subtle, but it was there like an invisible thread connecting them. For someone who had once ruled with certainty and power, Luca felt a deep sense of vulnerability he had never known before. Aaliyah, on the other hand, seemed unbothered by the cold, his calm demeanor never wavering. Luca stole a glance at the Omega, his curiosity deepening. "How do you stay so calm?" Luca asked, his voice breaking the silence between them. Aaliyah's gaze remained forward, but there was a faint smile on his lips. "It's not about staying calm," he said, his tone soft yet firm. "It's about understanding that everything in life has its time and place. Worrying about things that are out of your control only weighs you down. It's better to accept the world as it is and find peace in that acceptance." Luca mulled over the words, feeling a tug at his chest. He had spent his life in control, always striving for dominance over every situation. The idea of surrendering to life's flow, of accepting things as they were, was foreign to him. But something about Aaliyah's words resonated deeply. It was as if they were unlocking a part of him that had been buried for so long. As they continued walking, Luca's mind wandered back to the moment when he had first opened his eyes to find Aaliyah kneeling beside him. There had been a sense of uncertainty in his heart, but now, with each passing moment, that uncertainty began to fade. Luca realized that, for the first time in his life, he didn't need to have all the answers. The feeling was liberating. He looked at Aaliyah, and for the first time, he saw him not just as an Omega, but as someone who held wisdom that was beyond the reach of the greatest warriors or kings. "I've spent so much of my life chasing control," Luca admitted quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. "But it feels like everything I've built is slipping away. My power, my position, it's all meaningless." Aaliyah turned his head slightly, catching Luca's gaze. There was a quiet understanding in his eyes, a look that told Luca he wasn't alone in his struggle. "Control is an illusion," Aaliyah said softly. "It's easy to believe that power makes us strong, but real strength comes from within, from knowing who you are without needing to prove it to anyone." Luca's heart skipped a beat. He had heard similar words in passing before, but they had never felt so true. "And what about you?" Luca asked. "What makes you strong?" Aaliyah smiled, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm strong because I accept myself. I don't need to fight for my place in the world. The world will reveal my place when the time is right." Luca couldn't help but admire the simplicity in Aaliyah's words. It was a perspective that he had never considered, but now, standing there in the snow, it felt like a truth he had been waiting to hear. The journey ahead would not be easy. Luca knew that, but with Aaliyah's guidance, he was beginning to see a path forward. A path that didn't rely on strength alone, but on understanding, patience, and trust. And as the two of them walked through the snowy landscape, Luca realized that he wasn't just being saved from the storm. He was being shown a new way of seeing the world, a way that didn't revolve around power, but around something deeper, something more enduring. Aaliyah and Luca continued their journey through the snow, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air between them. With each step, the landscape slowly began to change. The dense forest that had surrounded them gave way to an open clearing, where the snow seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The silence between them felt less heavy now, filled with a strange understanding that neither of them had expected. Luca, still feeling the weight of his past, glanced at Aaliyah. For the first time since their meeting, he felt like he could truly speak without the need to hide behind his title or strength. "I never realized how much I've been missing," Luca said quietly, his voice low but sincere. Aaliyah didn't immediately respond, but his steady gaze told Luca that he was listening. "I spent so much time fighting for control, thinking that it was the only thing that mattered. But now," Luca trailed off, uncertain of how to finish the thought. "Now you're starting to see things differently?" Aaliyah asked, his voice calm but gentle. Luca nodded. "Yes. Everything seems so small now. The power, the kingdom, even my role as Alpha King. I thought I had to control everything, but maybe it's not about that at all." Aaliyah gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It's not about control," he agreed. "True power doesn't come from domination. It comes from understanding, from knowing when to act and when to let things be." Luca's mind was still processing all of this, but there was something freeing about hearing Aaliyah's perspective. For so long, Luca had believed that to lead, to be strong, meant to always have answers, to always be in control. But Aaliyah's words challenged everything he had thought to be true. "What would you do then?" Luca asked, genuinely curious. "If you didn't have to control everything, what would you do?" Aaliyah thought for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon as if the answer lay out there somewhere. "I would listen," Aaliyah said finally. "I would listen to the world around me, to the people who need help, to the things that are being said without words. Sometimes the answers come when we stop trying to force them." Luca considered this. He had always been the one who gave orders, who told others what to do, but never had he truly listened. Not to the people, not to his surroundings, and certainly not to his own heart. The realization stung, but it also felt like the first step toward something new. "Maybe I've been too focused on what I can do," Luca said quietly, almost to himself, "and not enough on what I need to understand." Aaliyah nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Exactly. You don't need to have all the answers. What matters is being open to the questions, and finding the strength to face them, even if they challenge everything you thought you knew." Luca looked at Aaliyah, a sense of gratitude swelling in his chest. He had always thought of himself as the one who would teach others, the one with the answers. But now here was someone who was showing him a new path, a way to find strength not in dominance, but in understanding and vulnerability. It was a lesson he had never expected, but one that felt more important than anything he had ever learned as a king. They continued walking, the snow now a soft blanket beneath their feet. Luca couldn't help but wonder what other lessons awaited him, what other truths he would uncover as he walked beside Aaliyah. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Luca felt ready to face it. With Aaliyah by his side, he knew he wasn't alone in this journey. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something far greater than power. It was the beginning of self-discovery. Aaliyah and Luca continued their journey. The once brutal wind now softened into a gentle breeze. The snow beneath their feet crunched lightly. As they walked, their steps in sync, though each was lost in his own thoughts. Luca could feel the weight of his previous revelations, the shift in his understanding of power, control, and himself. For the first time in his life, he was not just a king, a ruler over people, but a man searching for meaning beyond titles. The silence between them was comfortable, not strained. Elias seemed content to let it be, trusting that Luca would find his own way through this new path. After what felt like hours of walking, they reached a small clearing, a peaceful spot surrounded by tall, snow-covered trees. The air here was fresh, crisp, and clean, the kind of air Luca had never taken the time to notice before. The landscape was still, but somehow alive in a way that made Luca pause, appreciating its quiet beauty. Elias sat down on a fallen log, brushing off the snow, and gestured for Luca to do the same. "It's not always about moving forward," Elias said, looking up at the sky as if the words were more for himself than for Luca. "Sometimes, the best way to move forward is to stop and take a breath." Luca sat down beside him, his muscles still sore from the exertion, but a strange calm had settled over him. He wasn't sure if it was the stillness of the place or Elia's words, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he was at peace. He didn't feel the need to dominate or control the situation. For once, he just existed. "How did you learn all this?" Luca asked, his voice softer than usual. "How did you learn to accept life without feeling the need to control it?" Elias smiled, a quiet and knowing smile. "I didn't learn it all at once," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I've spent years trying to understand my place in this world. It wasn't easy, especially when I was told that I was less than others simply because I was an Omega, but I realized that being less doesn't mean being weak. It just means I have a different role to play, a role that doesn't require me to fight for power." Luca listened carefully, the weight of Elia's words sinking in deeper. He had always seen himself as someone who was meant to lead, to be strong, to fight for control. But Elia's approach to life was different. He wasn't trying to fight for power. He simply existed, letting the world reveal itself to him in its own time. "I've spent so much of my life chasing something I didn't understand," Lucas said, his voice almost a whisper. "I thought power was everything. But now I see that it's not about how much power I have. It's about knowing who I am without it." Elia nodded slowly. "Exactly," he said. "The strength you're looking for has always been inside you. It just takes time to recognize it." Luca's heart stirred at those words. They were simple, yet they held more meaning than anything he had ever learned in his life. He had been searching for strength in all the wrong places, thinking that it came from others or from his position as a king. But true strength, as Elia had shown him, came from within, an inner peace, an acceptance of oneself and the world as it was. Luca felt a new sense of clarity, a new understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. And as he sat next to Elia, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the snow-covered world, Luca realized that this journey was only the beginning. He had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it, not with the arrogance of a king, but with the humility of a man who had learned that real power was not in control, but in acceptance. He glanced at Elia, and in that moment, he knew that whatever lay ahead, he wouldn't have to face it alone. Elia and Luca continued their journey through the quiet forest, the snow-covered ground beneath them now firm and solid under their boots. It had been several days since Luca's collapse in the storm, and with each passing step, he felt stronger, but not in the way he had once measured strength. He no longer counted his power by his ability to control, to dominate, or to command. It was a different kind of strength now, one that came from within, from understanding, from connection. They had left the clearing behind, and the path ahead was still unknown. The only thing Luca knew for certain was that his view of the world had changed. His mind was no longer clouded by the need for dominance, and instead, he found himself paying attention to the small things, the way the light filtered through the trees, the sound of the wind through the branches, the quiet rhythm of their footsteps. Every detail felt alive, something he had never noticed before in all his years as a king. He glanced at Elia, who walked beside him with quiet confidence, as if the world itself had slowed down to match his calm pace. There was no rush, no urgency in Elia's movements. He simply existed in the moment, fully present with the world around him. For a brief moment, Luca envied that ability. "Aaliyah," Lucas said, his voice soft, breaking the silence. "How do you do it? How do you stay so centered?" Aaliyah smiled, his eyes twinkling with an understanding that Luca hadn't yet fully grasped. "It's not about doing anything, Luca. It's about being. Being present, being true to yourself, and allowing life to unfold as it will. You can't control the wind or the rain, but you can learn to move with it." Luca's brow furrowed slightly as he tried to process the words. "And what if the wind is too strong? What if the storm is too much to bear?" Aaliyah's gaze softened, and he slowed his pace for a moment, turning slightly to face Luca. "Then you learn to find shelter," Aaliyah said simply. "You don't fight the storm. You find a way to navigate through it. Sometimes the storm teaches us what we need to learn, if we're willing to listen." Luca stood still for a moment, the words sinking in. He had spent his entire life trying to fight against everything he couldn't control, trying to bend the world to his will. But now, standing here with Aaliyah, he realized how exhausting and fruitless that had been. "I never saw it that way before," Luca admitted, his voice thoughtful. "I always thought that to be strong, I had to control everything. I thought I had to fight for every inch, that I had to dominate to survive." Aaliyah nodded, his expression calm but knowing. "And now you see that it's not about domination, but about understanding, about finding balance. True strength is in knowing when to fight and when to let go." Luca took a deep breath, the weight of the realization settling in his chest. It wasn't easy, but he was beginning to understand. True strength wasn't about holding on tightly to what you could control. It was about having the courage to face the unknown, to accept the flow of life, and to move forward with grace, no matter how uncertain the path ahead might seem. He looked at Aaliyah, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons Aaliyah had shared, for the way he had shown Luca how to see the world in a different light. "Thank you," Luca said quietly. Aaliyah didn't respond right away, but the warmth in his smile was enough. It was clear that he didn't need words to understand the depth of Luca's gratitude. Together, they continued walking, the path before them still uncertain, but the weight of the past slowly lifting with every step. With Aaliyah by his side, Luca felt ready to face whatever came next, not as a king, but as a man who was learning what it meant to truly live. Aaliyah and Luca continued their journey through the dense forest, the silence between them now comfortable, as if the weight of their past had finally begun to lift. The snow had lightened, and the world around them seemed to glow under the soft light of the setting sun. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Luca felt no rush to know what came next. The quiet was no longer something to be feared or avoided. Instead, it felt like a space for reflection, a space where he could hear his own thoughts, free from the pressure of duty and expectations. As they walked, Luca found himself thinking more deeply about the words Aaliyah had shared with him. Understanding, acceptance, balance. These were things he had never considered before. He had always believed that strength was defined by dominance, by being the one in control. But Aaliyah had shown him another way. It wasn't about bending the world to your will. It was about moving with it, accepting its unpredictability. "Do you ever wonder what it all means?" Luca asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. Aaliyah turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone curious but calm. "Life," Luca said, his words slow, as if testing them. "All of it. The things we go through, the things we believe in. Do you ever question it?" Aaliyah smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "I think questioning is natural. It's how we learn, how we grow. But the answer isn't always something we can grasp right away. Sometimes, it takes time to understand why things happen." Luca nodded, feeling the weight of Aaliyah's words. Time. That was something Luca had never truly considered before. He had always been in a hurry to get things done, to achieve, to conquer. But what if there was more to life than simply rushing through it? What if the answers weren't meant to be rushed, but uncovered gradually? "I've always wanted answers right away," Luca admitted, his voice quiet. I've spent my life trying to control everything so that I could have the answers. But now I realize that maybe it's not about having all the answers. Maybe it's about learning to live with the questions. Aaliyah's gaze softened, and he nodded in agreement. Exactly. Sometimes we don't have all the answers. And that's okay. Life isn't about having everything figured out. It's about living in the moment and trusting that the answers will come when the time is right. Luca felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had spent so long fighting, so long trying to control every aspect of his life, that he had never allowed himself to simply be. But now, with Aaliyah's guidance, he was beginning to understand that true strength didn't come from having all the answers. It came from embracing the unknown, from accepting that life was full of mysteries that couldn't always be solved. As they continued their journey, Luca felt lighter, freer. The burden of his past seemed less heavy, as if it had been replaced by something more valuable, an open heart and a willingness to learn. He looked at Aaliyah, and for the first time, he saw him not just as an Omega, not just as someone who had saved him, but as a teacher, a guide. Aaliyah had shown him that there was another way to live, another way to be strong, and for that, Luca was grateful. The path ahead was still unclear, but now, Luca knew that whatever challenges they might face, he wouldn't face them alone. With Aaliyah by his side, he was ready to embrace the journey, uncertain as it might be. And for the first time, he felt truly at peace with whatever came next. Aaliyah and Luca reached the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to a vast open plain. The setting sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground, and the world before them seemed endless. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Luca looked out at the horizon, feeling the quiet beauty of the landscape seep into his bones. It was as if the world was waiting for him to take the next step. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of what that next step would be. His heart was no longer weighed down by the need for control, nor burdened by the expectations of the past. He had walked away from the role of the Alpha King, but in doing so, he had found something far more valuable: peace. Do you ever wonder what lies beyond the horizon? Luca asked quietly, his voice filled with a curiosity that had not been there before. Aaliyah, standing beside him, took a deep breath and smiled. I think it's the unknown that makes life worth living, he said softly. If we knew everything, what would be the point of the journey? Sometimes it's the not knowing that allows us to grow. Luca turned to Aaliyah, his gaze thoughtful. I've spent so much of my life focused on what I thought I knew, what I thought I could control, Luca admitted. But now, I realize that the most important part of this journey is what I still have yet to learn. Aaliyah nodded, his expression gentle but knowing. And that's the beauty of it, he said. The journey is never over, as long as we remain open to it. There's always more to discover, more to understand, more to become. Luca felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He had been so focused on finding answers, on conquering the challenges that life threw his way. But now, he saw that the real challenge was in embracing the journey itself, in accepting that there was no final destination, only the endless road ahead. For the first time, Luca truly understood what it meant to live. It wasn't about power or strength or dominance. It was about being present, about moving through life with an open heart, and trusting that whatever came next was part of the path he was meant to walk. I think I've spent enough time trying to outrun my past, Lucas said, his voice steady. It's time to stop fighting and start living. Aaliyah placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a comforting presence. You've taken the first step, Luca, he said softly. And that's the hardest one. The rest of the journey will come when it's ready. Lucas smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through him. The weight of his old life, the life of the Alpha King, had faded into the background. What remained now was a man who was ready to embrace whatever the world had to offer. Together, they stood on the edge of the unknown, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as partners, not just allies, but as people who had learned the true meaning of strength, the courage to accept life as it was, and to trust in the journey ahead.